Welcome back to a Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and today I'm delighted to be back, and I'm joined by James McKenzie. How are you doing, James?
Yeah, I'm doing good. It's finally going to have Celtic back this weekend.
I know, in a big way,
Yeah, when
in a
you're doing a
massive way.
football podcast, football's a massive part in your life. So being without Celtic for ages, the World Cup's done its best to fill that, but it'll just be good to have Celtic back at the weekend.
It definitely will be. We have a massive weekend. We'll be talking about some of that as the podcast goes through the 1 hour show that James and I will be with you for. But James, before we talk about this weekend, obviously there's been a wee bit of a break in the world of Celtic. We'll be talking about the bounce game that we had in Portugal, a couple of the plus points in that, some of the transfer gossip that's been flying around, the fact that we still have a player in the World Cup. Even though we're in the semi-finals, Josip Juranović, we're going to be asking the big question, how much are we demanding? There's loads of questions around the transfer fee, if indeed he does go, and I'm pretty sure he will, because of the circumstances we discussed last week. But before we get into all of that, we've been working away for a few months, James, on something a wee bit different, it's got to be said. We do our charity weekender every year now. This weekend will be the third annual charity weekender, and just to make it that wee bit different, over and above the 24 hours of content that we're going to be providing, we're releasing a single. We're moving into the world of rock and roll, James. It's been a long time coming, so first and foremost, I sent you the first draft of the video so that we could have a wee chat about it today. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I was going to say, I've not seen the final one you've just sent me, but the first sort of original draft, original preview that you sent me over, I think I said in the podcast I really enjoyed it. It's got a really good feel to it, and with the support of everybody that tunes in every week, who knows how well this could do on the charts.
I know. And the big thing with regards to this is the amount of people that have helped to create a single. What do I know about creating a single, releasing it into the world? Absolutely zero. Well, I know how to do it now, obviously. So we made the decision without having any knowledge. The Wakes, you will be aware of. I'm sure many of you listening into the show will be aware of the Wakes. They have re-recorded a song that was originally written by J.J. Gilmer and Gary John Kane of the Silencers and Proclaimers, respectively. Backing vocals provided by the phenomenally talented Carly Connor, who burst onto the scene about 10 years ago, had a big record deal down south, went down, made some records. She's now working with us and also gigging, etc., and doing her own thing. She adds a layer of vocals into the chorus, which is stunning. It's hairs on the back of your neck stuff. The video was shot a couple of weeks ago now, I think it was, and that will be premiered on our YouTube channel on Friday night at 7 o'clock. So if you haven't done so already, get subscribing to Axom's YouTube channel. Big premiere, 7 o'clock. And the concept is from paradise to the birthplace. So from Celtic Park down to St Mary's, everything in between. And if you were at the Barras that day, maybe you're in the video. Here we go. We'll start off with Michael McDonald. That 22 on his back is a starting price for all bidders. Before I speak about this, actually, you can actually pre-save the single, the download, and the link is underneath this video if you want to pre-save that, because basically what's going to happen is we're going to try and get as many downloads as possible, build a bit of momentum, and every single penny that comes back from that single goes to charity. We're supporting St Mary's Chapel down at the Carlton. That's Celtic's birthplace, of course. Michael McDonald, 22 million, he reckons the value is. Chris Sutton reckons it's 25 million. Let's talk about Juranovic. Let's talk about transfer valuations. The World Cup performances against Brazil, standout performances against Brazil. Where are we with this? Are you resigned to the fact we're losing them, first and foremost?
Yeah, I think the fact that we've brought another right back in for this January window, it surely tells us everything we need to know. Juranovic is going to be on his way out. We're not going to have three top quality right backs at the club, because the chances are one of them would get unhappy if all three of them were there.
Yeah.
Just for his price, I think at the start of the tournament, or before the tournament started, I would have been saying, like, most would have been the same boat as me, about £15 million, £15 to £18 million. That would have been sort of a fine fee for Juranovic, but he's got himself all the way to a World Cup semi-final now, and he's been one of Croatia's finest performers. As you mentioned, that Brazil game, he couldn't have pocketed Vinicius Junior for Celtic in those 2 games, but he decides to do it for Croatia. I'm thinking maybe around between 22 and 25 million pounds, because there's some big clubs being linked. We all knew about Atletico Madrid and Chelsea. Barcelona is the one that's recently been linked this morning. The right back market, it's one of the most valuable markets in football at the moment. Everybody's after a right back. One of the hardest positions to get. So we should be trying to look for as big of a fee as we can get, whether that's breaking our record sale or maybe around £22 million. Should we try to get as much money as we possibly can?
Yeah, without a doubt. I was looking at the circumstances around this. I mean, from Axom's perspective, James, we were talking in the pre-season on a Monday. Amy was involved in the conversation. I think Colin was involved in the conversation as well, about how we weren't selling anybody. We're trying to build something that we can do better in the Champions League. We're trying to build a team where we can do better in the Champions League. We're not selling any players. We didn't, to be fair, we didn't. But the circumstances now, we're out of Europe. Because of his performances and because Croatia have done so well at the World Cup, he is never going to have a higher value than he is right now and during this World Cup tournament, even if, and many people will expect, I think, Croatia to get knocked out in the semi-final stage by Argentina, although there's been a few shocks in this tournament. Even if they get knocked out, his value will never, I don't think, increase, certainly as a Celtic player, from this particular moment. So the circumstances are all pointing towards Juranovic going to the door, and now it's a case of, and if you look at the journey of Axom saying, no, we're in denial, it's not going to happen pre-season, to the acceptance, and now we're just thinking, right, what we're going to make of him. 22 million quid. I've said time and time again, Celtic, if they can make £10 million profit on a player, generally they'll definitely look at it. So I was thinking 12 to 13, maybe pushing it up to 15. But these World Cup performances, James, this is what's really going to push him into a different category. I'm going to bring Jungle Lion in. Welcome back to the show, Jungle Lion. At this moment, is Juranovic a better player than Tierney at the time that we sold Tierney? Presumably 25 million quid we got for Kieran Tierney. If so, then you're looking at 30 million plus. The age, there's obviously the slight difference in age there. But then you can balance that by saying, well, Tierney didn't do it at the level that Juranovic is doing it at right now. So is it too much to suggest, as Michael has, that we can get 20 million plus for this player?
I think Tierney, it was a whole different sort of profile. At that point, that was when left-backs were the hot commodity. Man City chucked about £50 million each at 3 players and it didn't stick. And when you look at Kieran Tierney, he was a very, very good left-back, performing at a very good level in the Champions League, we can't forget. And he was also very young. There was a very high ceiling. He only had lots of room to improve, whereas Juranovic is, about 27, 28. Mm-hmm. This is probably hitting his prime now, whereas Kieran Tierney was sort of just coming onto his game and he had loads of time to improve. Obviously, he's had trouble with injuries, so he's not been able to get as good as he probably should be at Arsenal, but I don't think you'd be looking for higher than Kieran Tierney. That was a whole different ballgame. A
different set of circumstances. You've just said to me there that everybody's in the market for a right back. We're currently sitting with 3. Ralston, Juranovic, and the new boy Johnson, who came in also. But, you know, when you look at the problems we had in that position, and we've spoken about this before as well, between Mika Lustig and Tony Ralston breaking back into the side under Ange Postecoglou, I can count 5. Tell me if there's any more. Bauer, Elhamed, Toljan, Frimpong and Kenny. There might have been 1 or 2 more in there, but they're the 5 that I can think of. You know?
Got them all.
Aye. And we couldn't buy a right back. No matter what market we went into. Toljan was a 7 million quid player at Borussia Dortmund. Didn't make it at Celtic. Kenny came up from Everton with quite a pedigree. Looked very ordinary. I think he had a really bad game against Rangers when they pumped us as well. Frimpong, I love wee Frimpong, but I didn't think he was a right back. I didn't think his qualities were in his defensive play.
A sort of starter either. He was a developmental player. That just was stumbled. That was chance. That was luck.
Remember we signed him. Here's an interesting one. A wee blast from the past. I remember we signed Frimpong, right, at the roughly the same time that we signed the other fullback. Now I'm just going to double check his name. Was it Leo Connor? Yes. So we brought in Leo Connor and we brought in Jeremy Frimpong, both kind of like, you know, projects signings. 300 grand to the Man City Academy for Frimpong, and then I think whatever the fee would have gone to Man United for Leo Connor, people kept saying, yeah, but he's an international, he's got a cap for Ireland. Didn't make I don't think he made a competitive appearance for Celtic, and he's now at Tranmere Rovers, and I think he's doing really well there. But I remember speaking to someone at the club around about that time, James, and they were saying that these two guys were neck and neck. They weren't quite sure which one was going to break in. They thought one of them would, and the other one would go out on loan. As it happens, as we all know, Frimpong breaks in, makes a huge impact. I thought first couple of months as a Celtic player, the impact he made was incredible. He really did show his potential, which he's now fulfilling, I think, now that he's left the club. And O'Connor obviously was the one who went out on loan and eventually left the club. We couldn't buy a right back. Now we're talking in excess of 20 million quid. Chris Sutton reckons 25 million. I mean, these are just figures plucked out of the air. Who knows? It all depends on the clubs who are interested. But for sure, big money is going to come Celtic's way if indeed we do sign Juranovic. Let's have a wee chat about Juranovic's performances then in the World Cup. Let's start off with that, James. How impressed have you been? I mean, you were saying there that he did something with Vinicius Junior he couldn't do when he played with Celtic. Circumstances, different team, the monumental event that he's in at the World Cup. He's probably learning all the time. The Champions League performances probably held him in good stead for his World Cup challenge. How impressed have you been with him? He's been fairly consistent, and then that standout performance against Brazil.
I think going into the tournament, I wasn't too sure as to how Juranovic would do. Because, I mean, he had done well at the Euros, but, I mean, a lot of Celtic fans were pretty disappointed with him when it came to the Champions League games. But he's been absolutely brilliant in the World Cup. I mean, a lot of pundits have been raving about him as well. I don't know if you've seen, I think it was either half-time or full-time of the Brazil game. There was a good 2-minute stretch where Josip Juranović was the only player they were talking about. I can't remember who the pundit was exactly, but they were absolutely raving about him. And he's been one of the most consistent players at the World Cup. I think outside of the Moroccan right-back, Hakimi, he's probably been the best right-back of the tournament. He's been absolutely brilliant, and if Croatia go all the way, I mean, it's pretty unlikely considering some of the teams that are there, but if Croatia go all the way, even to the finals, I think the fee could go up even more. Who knows how much we could get? Because the World Cup, we know how much that boosts players' transfer values. I mean,
absolutely.
If you remember James Rodriguez, he had a really good World Cup with Colombia. I think it was 2014. Straight after that, gets an 80 million move to Real Madrid. I mean, his team only got to the quarterfinals. I mean, we should be trying to drive up as much as we can. If we could accept around 25 million, that would be great. But just try and drive up, entice these teams. You never know how much they'll pay. If you don't ask, you don't get.
No, you're right. I mean, the World Cup as a platform, it really propels players, it propels values to completely different levels. And often, slightly different, but often I get asked or criticised about, why do you speak to other platforms, James? Why do you speak to the mainstream media? They're the enemy. And my view on that is always that I'm promoting a Celtic State of Mind. I'm promoting Axom. And then what happens is you come up to a point this week where we've got something really important to promote with a charity weekender, and you get more exposure because you've done these other things during the year in terms of other broadcasters. I also think that it's important to challenge the narrative. So if someone says that a certain broadcaster doesn't allow Celtic fans a voice, get on there and change it. And people are going to disagree with that, and that's fine because I understand what the argument is. But that is one of the main reasons. You put yourself on a different platform and it escalates the momentum, the exposure. I mean, people talking about Celtic players, it's been an absolute thrill to watch some of the commentators, like you say, talking about Juranovic. Maeda, they were talking about Mooy in really glowing terms. And it's brilliant to see because these people, a lot of the time, look at Scottish football as a football backwater. Yet, 4 of our players have all performed extremely well on the highest level that you can possibly attain as a footballer. So, absolutely agree with that. Paddy Lavery, welcome to you, sir. And can I just say, Christmas card number 1 arrives at a State of Mind today, and it is from the Aberdeen boys. Thank you very much. That means a lot because we talk away, obviously, on a daily basis on here. A massive part of that happened during a period where no one could leave the house, and it's just a face and a voice. And it's great to receive something as personal as that. So thank you very, very much, Paddy, and the boys in Ardoyne. Thank you very much for that. Frank Brennan is coming in. Anyone or anything is only ever worth what someone is prepared to pay. Fair dues. So the vendor can never, ever demand anything. But what they are able to say is that he's not leaving for less than this price. Isn't that kind of the same thing? I'll certainly give you the same outcome. However, I get what you mean. And what you're looking for is a bit of a bidding war here, James. If you get two big clubs, cash-rich clubs, and they're desperate for a right back, that's where it could get very, very interesting indeed. And we've known over the years, some people within certain sections of the media in Scotland have, created fictitious figures for the values of players in Scottish football. But this time round, the circumstances are completely different. He's starring on a stage, the entire globe is watching, and clubs will be watching, and there's going to be a lot of interest. Juranovic himself, James, says that he's told his agent before he comes into this tournament, I'm not talking about a transfer. Fair play, but there will be a lot of business going on behind the scenes, won't there?
Yeah, I don't know how much I buy that. I mean, when the rumours first started flying about before the World Cup started, I saw they were sort of sending laughing emojis to Celtic fan pages. But as we were saying there, the transfer wouldn't be on his mind. It would be the World Cup. It would be his national team. We know how passionate all these Croatian players are about their national team. We saw that in 2018. That's all the proof you need. But we should be trying to drive up the fee as much as we can. As the commenter said there, try and start the bidding about £18 million maybe. Start the bidding there. That's the lowest we will go. If clubs try and drive us down, then who knows. But you've seen a lot of Scottish players have been playing very well at the World Cup. I mean, Harry Souttar used to play in Scotland. I don't know if the Australian centre-back, he's now getting linked to I don't know if this is just paper talk, but £15 to £20 million was touted for Harry Souttar in Premier League moves. I know he played pretty well, but I just wanted to mention how good a couple of the boys in the Scottish League were. I mean, the sight of Dundee United's left-back running through the entire Argentina team and nearly getting a last-minute equaliser, it was quite something to behold, considering Abada and Jota absolutely tore Dundee United apart in that 9-0 game at Tannadice. I know. Just even, I think it's Kai Rowles, the Hearts centre-back, even he had a fairly solid tournament. Harry Souttar was a standout one. But if he can drive his transfer price up to about £20 million, God knows how much we should be looking at for Juranovic.
It is incredible because I think previously I've said, the £12 to £15 million mark is what I'd be looking for. But I think if there was an announcement in a couple of weeks that we've sold Juranovic and it was £15 million, I'd probably be pretty disappointed now. There was a conversation we were all having about World Cup Celts, obviously, from the past, and we know that there are two players who have there's more than two players who were World Cup winners who played with Celtic or played in a World Cup final, who had played for Celtic, but they played in the final whilst with other clubs. So it was Girinho, the Brazilian, and Edson Braithwaite, who played with the Netherlands. And there was a bit of a to-in and fro-in, so I'd like to see what the commenters say, because my view on that is Braithwaite had left Celtic after his loan deal. His contract was up on the 31st of May. He goes back to his parent club, and then he plays in the World Cup in July. So yes, he is a Celtic player who has, played in a World Cup final, but he wasn't with Celtic at the time. That was my argument. Because there was a suggestion that Juranovic may have been the only player that's played in a World Cup semi-final whilst at Celtic. Are there others?
Trying to think, because a lot of sort of the historic Celtic names have been Scottish. A lot of our sort of historic players back in the day have been Scottish. I'm trying to think, Henrik Larsson.
Did they ever get to the semis?
I can't remember, was it a Euros semis or a World Cup semis?
Good question.
I know he's done well to get to one of them.
Talking to Larsson, James, we were talking there about the links to Barcelona. Obviously, unless you can tell me different, the last player we sold to Barcelona, or the last player who left Celtic and went to Barcelona, would have been Henrik Larsson, right? We've not had any since then. And there was talk recently about Frimpong moving to Barcelona. If Celtic were to sell Juranovic to Barcelona, he would be the first player to go that route since Henrik Larsson. The other player that I can think of that played with both clubs was Mark Krosas. Remember him? Mark Krosas, yeah.
Maybe the most recent. I don't know if Barcelona's as glamorous as it was then when Henrik Larsson moved. I mean, there's doubts that Juranovic might even get his full pay. I mean, we've seen the uproar that kicked off about Frankie de Jong. He didn't get his full pay. The club's a little bit of a disaster, but they're on the up now. I think they're top of the Liga. So just to have a Celtic player at a club like that, it would be absolutely phenomenal.
It would be. It would be absolutely phenomenal. Keep us right in the comments. I'm sure you will. Is Juranovic the only player, whilst still at Celtic, to play in a World Cup semi-final? Let me know if that is the case. Now, John Bosas comes in. I can now picture wee Juranovic parading the World Cup down the Gallagate. Actually, John, there may well be some Gallagate footage on our Glory in the Dream video. There may well be. You'll need to tune in on Friday night for the premiere to see if that is the case. And Urban Culture reckons that Kane's ball hit Ryan Christie's on the way down. We've not actually mentioned England's departure. I think a lot has been said about that already. And you know what? There might be people in that comments. Nah, I don't think it will offend anybody in the comments section. Big shout out to the Sully Shamrock, who tunes in on a daily basis, not always live. Big shout out to you. You've been watching all year. And thank you everybody who is tuning in today. Whilst we're on the subject of World Cups and what it's done for players, what it's certainly done for Juranovic is put him in a global shop window. Let's have a look at what it's done for the other players that we've had involved in this tournament. Starting off with Daizen Maeda. Never played every minute, but he also impressed, didn't he? He impressed a lot of people, I think, who were probably unaware of him, particularly the commentators and the commentary team at half-time. Very, very impressed with Maeda. And he goes into this tournament having had a bit of a sticky patch in the first half of his domestic season. What's it going to do for him when he comes back to Celtic, James?
Yeah, I think you're quite right in the assessment that a lot of the commentators didn't know. I mean, the commentators probably called him about 3 different names over the course of the 90 minutes. I mean, I still have trouble trying to pronounce his name as well, and I watch him basically every week. But we saw his sort of key attribute on show on the global stage, and we saw that it worked as well. I think it was in the game against Spain, it was his pressing that directly led to Japan's first goal. I can't remember if it was the Spain or the Germany game, but the pundits were praising him for it as well. His pressing was very, very good. And obviously, to get the World Cup goal, only Celtic player to score at this World Cup, it's absolutely brilliant to see. And maybe that'll add about 10 million onto his price tag, the fact he's got a World Cup goal. Some of the scouts have seen that he's a wee bit fast. Maybe we can punt him for about 13 million in January. But I think Ange will be delighted with how he's performed, and he'll be coming back to Celtic with a lot of confidence. I don't know how happy he'll be to see Juranovic so soon, considering Juranovic's Croatia team knocked him out. But they shared a really nice moment after the game. I don't know if you've seen it, but that'll be good. That'll be good to have Maeda back, and he'll have a lot of confidence heading into the sort of next few parts of the season.
It will be, a confident player, Maeda. We're going to be talking about a few of the others that will be back for Celtic, including captain Callum McGregor, and how that's going to impact the side. But Maeda, he's a player, as I say, that he's been criticised a wee bit on here and elsewhere for his performances, but he's gone out there and I think he's proved a lot of people wrong. You look at the transfer fee for a player like Maeda, and I always remember speaking to ex-Celt Paddy McCourt, and he says the bottom line is this: if a player would sell the next day for a profit, so we were talking about Edouard at the time, and he was talking about, what did we pay for him? £9 million. Could you sell him for 9.5 tomorrow? Yes, you could. So he's been worth every penny. Maeda, if you were to sell him tomorrow, it would be a wee bit more than £1.5 million, that's for sure. Going back to the World Cup tax, as I think it's been called, that goes on to the values of players. Paul Diet, welcome to the show. Afternoon all. The countdown is on till the hoops are back. Cannot wait. We'll be talking all about the game coming up at this weekend. We've also got Walter Orr, morning from Virginia, USA. Hopefully you've got good weather over there. It's a bit chilly over here, Walter, as we head into the festive season. Michael Ross, hail, my fellow Celts. We've got the Urban Culture. We need a good semi-final showing from JJ and 3 clubs desperate to sign him. Then it's Lowell time. Now listen, I wasn't going to bring up Peter Lowell, but you did, Urban Culture, so let's run with this one. I know he's not on the door yet, Because we all know he probably is. And he has been criticised. He's been criticised quite a bit, I guess, over the piece since Axom started streaming live on this channel. But let's concede for a moment, James, that when it comes to negotiations, he is somebody that you would like in your corner. You would like him fighting your corner in a Juranovic scenario, wouldn't you?
Yeah, he's... Sorry. Yeah, we always call him penny pinching. But when it comes to these negotiations, he likes to try and get as much as he possibly can. I mean, the Tierney sort of saga went on for the entire summer, and they eventually agreed on the £25 million fee. But also, I'd go back to when we're selling players like Virgil van Dijk, players like Fraser Forster. I think there was more money to get from those players. I mean, you look at what Virgil van Dijk turned into. Victor Wanyama went on to play for Tottenham after Southampton. These are players that we could have tried to get a lot more money out of. And I think Law could have really tried to drive up those fees. I know it was sort of a different transfer window back then. The players weren't going for as crazy fees as they perhaps are now. But that's one of the reasons why we don't get much money for players as other leagues do. The Scottish League sort of just accepts defeat when it comes to selling players. We should be valuing our commodities as high as the other leagues do, as high as the Belgian league sell their players for, as high as the Eredivisie sell their players for. We should be trying to get as much money as we can for our players because we see them going on. We see their values skyrocketing at these other clubs, and it's like he was that good at this club as he was at Celtic.
Yeah,
Van Dijk wasn't as good at Southampton as he was at Celtic. I mean, we should be trying to get as much as we possibly can.
Absolutely. I mean, I've heard the argument for years about the Scottish game. But I honestly do think that we devalue it ourselves, not as fans, by the way, but as clubs. I do think we devalue it. Is there a better person in your ring to fight your cause than Peter Lawwell in a scenario like that? Probably not. You've got to concede that. There's a lot that he brings to the table, and that is something that he would be great at. It's not the role of a chairman, which is obviously something you need to point out, because I keep getting the definition of non-executive chairman. That's all fair and well, but how often do people work to the definition of their job role, especially if they've got such a big influence and colossal kind of reputation as Peter Lawwell? Anyway, I appreciate that it will not be him doing the bargaining, but I'm sure he will be involved in some way, shape or form. There's some really interesting points coming through. I believe Van Dijk was the one that really gets to me with regards to it, and not just because he went, to Liverpool for the fee that he went for. You knew how good he was. You really, really knew potentially what he could go on to do. And he's gone on and done every single bit of it. Within the Scottish game, we devalue our domestic game. Yet if we've got players like Juranovic who are performing at Champions League level against a team that's won 5 and 10 Champions Leagues, and then he's going into the World Cup, he's getting into the semi-final, he's performing so well against Brazil, a lot of people's tip for the actual tournament, then we've got to start looking at the transfer fee differently. Now, we've got Gucci Truther. I'm English and I'm glad we went out. Deary me. And this is a big thing. I read a really interesting piece talking about how sometimes the commentary, the attitude of some of the commentary teams really annoys you because of right. You've got that, and then you've got. And listen, I'm not saying everybody that goes to an England game's a hooligan, but you've got a hooligan element that follows them all around the world. That turns you off the whole thing. But there are so many decent fans, going to just watch the football and their dreams are shattered. And then we get one coming on saying, I'm not fussed that they're out. That's fair enough. Alan Robertson, if we get a bid over 15 million for JJ, do you take it? Now, this is the thing, because that was my thinking pre-World Cup. But I think that's shifted. I really do. I do think that's shifted, Alan. Frank Brennan. Is there a single club desperate to sign JJ? Never mind 3, for goodness sake. Well, I don't think you ever know for sure exactly everybody that's interested in a specific player. Often it takes years at times to find out that a club was interested in a player. Take Olivier Giroud, for example. We spoke about him last week. Celtic were interested in him when he went to Montpellier. We only found out about it when he wrote about it in his autobiography. So we'll not find out exactly who's interested, but you've just basically got to say, which sources do you trust? And there are certain sources talking about the Atletico Madrid interest and certainly the Chelsea interest. I know that Barcelona have started, their name starts to be bandied about in the last day or two. I guess, Frank, you just go with the sources that you trust. There are definitely a couple of clubs interested at this point, if you believe the sources, and the sources are very, very good. They've got good reputations. Alan Robertson goes on to say that he thinks 18 million would be ideal. Would you be disappointed with 18 million with some add-ons?
I feel like we should try for more. We should try our luck, because clubs, you never know how much they'll pay with players. As I said, clubs are desperate for right backs at the moment. I mean, I think the fee that's getting touted for Jeremy Frimpong at the moment is round about 30 million, 25 to 30 million. I mean, consider he's, 21 years old, Netherlands right back, got all this future ahead of him. When you look at that and compare it to Juranovic, perhaps maybe £18 million would be a pretty fair fee. But we know we've got Peter Law in our corner, as you mentioned there. We can try and push for as much money as we can. And just on the England fans there, I was at the fine establishment that is the Three Sisters in Edinburgh, and I couldn't hear the commentators, thankfully, because I had all the fans chatting, and I got a strange mix, because you get some of the England fans that are actually not bad, they're just there to watch the football. Mm-hmm. Then you get the other ones who are tossing pints across the place, giving it the whole England chance. So there was a fine mix. I mean, I got some of the good and some of the bad at this place.
It's been a long, long time since I was in that establishment, James. Maybe even before your time, actually, mate. But let's not get into that. Michael Ross, where's the story coming from about Giakoumakis being available for £6 million? Surely it's a joke. I hope it's a joke. I don't think, £6 million. You've got to ask yourself, I guess, Michael, could you replace him for £6 million? I'm not sure you could. Unless you were buying somebody with the promise, somebody who was 19, 20, we were linked in the summer with a prospect from the PSG Academy. We've already plucked Odsonne Edouard from that same academy in the past. £6 million for an academy player obviously is a risk as well, but we know the standard's higher. I don't think you could replace Giakoumakis for that amount.
We've seen everybody talking about Dembele. I mean, I've seen people, news outlets saying that he could be going to the Turkish league for £5 million. As a massive Moussa Dembele fan, probably one of my favourite players I've seen at Celtic in my lifetime, would I take maybe around £8 to £10 million for Giakoumakis if we could replace him with Moussa Dembele? I hate to say it to Gigi, but I would take Moussa Dembele every day of the week. And I think just on the actual reliability of the news, I think the guy that's reporting it is the same guy that was reporting his move to Celtic in the first place.
Right.
Because if we remember correctly, Giakoumakis, he was supposed to go to Werder Bremen. He was there for a medical and stuff, but I can't remember how it fell away. But the move fell apart somehow, and then he came to Celtic. And the guy that reported all that correctly, he's the guy that's now reporting this. So Giakoumakis' agent might be feeding him something, and Giakoumakis is now looking for a new agent. Perhaps that's to try and force a move, who knows. But if we could replace him with Moussa Dembele, I would happily do that. I don't know if Moussa feels that maybe that book's closed, that chapter's closed, it's time to go on for something new, but if he's happy to come back here, why not?
Oh, for £5 million, I think I'd take that in a heartbeat. Django Lion, Tierney went for £25 million, but you make the point Juranovic is doing it at a World Cup, so it has to be more. Listen, it's going to be an interesting development nonetheless. Michael Ross comes back in to say, according to the newspapers, 4 clubs are after Juranovic. Yeah, I mean, he's going places, there's no doubt about that. And Paul Cook comes in, afternoon, Paul and James. Hail to the team, Axom and Fuji's Toner. Happy Monday, Celts. Thank goodness the Hoops are back this weekend. Talking of Happy Mondays, you might have seen Gaz Whelan has got his Celtic Shamrock tracksuit from Axom. Hopefully one of the Axom stickers ends up on his guitar. Happy Mondays were one of the finest bands from the 90s, one of my favourites. So you can imagine when one of their founder members starts kicking about in Axom gear, that is something of a thrill for me on a personal level. We spoke about Maeda, James. Let's move on to Mooy. And I'll tell you something, he turned heads as well at the World Cup with his performances.
Yeah, I was one of the doubters when we signed Darren Mooy, but he's sort of been a solid player. I don't think you could call him a roaring success at Celtic yet, as you could as someone like Kyogo, who set the league alight straight away. He's just been slowly prodding along and he's been doing his job. I suppose if you're not really noticing a player that plays in Mooy's position, then that's probably a good thing. He's doing his job correctly. And at the World Cup, he was pretty decent, I thought. I've mentioned on the podcast that I think it was 20 minutes against France where he looked like the Zinedine Zidane on that pitch. He was absolutely phenomenal. And in the Tunisia game, for the full 90, I thought he was absolutely brilliant. There's no chance of us selling Mooy on for 20 million nowadays, given his age. But as we said with Maeda, the confidence that he'll have, Maeda was low in confidence coming into the World Cup. We could all see that from the chances he'd missed. And the boost that will give Maeda is absolutely tremendous. And I think Mooy will be sort of riding a bit of momentum as well. We saw the pride that it gave to the Australian nation as well. We saw all the fans in the fan zone when they got out the group, when they beat Denmark. So he'll be riding high as well, coming back to Celtic, and that's exactly what you want. I think I want to jump on to Carter Vickers as well. He only got the chance to play one game, which I was completely astounded by. And it was conveniently the only game that the United States won at the tournament, was the one that Cameron Carter Vickers started. I think in the 2026 World Cup in America, he will have more of a say. Whether he's still at Celtic in 2026, who knows? But I think he will be a starter then. And I hope he's not had a confidence hit from not playing, because as we've said many times, he is the Celtic defence. So we saw how shaky we looked in Rennes. We conceded 4 goals?
Yeah, in one half.
In the end, and a lot of them looked like they were from set pieces. So having Cameron Carter Vickers back, it will be really good for Celtic.
It will be. I mean, just to touch on some of the points you've made there with regards to Mooy and earlier on Maeda. What's Juranovic done and what's his World Cup performance he's done? It probably escalated the fee to something that's going to really help us, continue to build the team for Ange Postecoglou. Maeda and Mooy, I'd put them in the same category. I think they're going to come in with a renewed sense of confidence or more confidence than they had when they went to the World Cup. Carter Vickers, there'll be a disappointment, but he can look at himself and say, the game that I did play, he played particularly well. I was just thinking about CCV. Every time I hear that, it takes me back to a previous job when I worked in the bank, and the CCV number is the 3-digit security number on the back of your card, and it is an added layer of security. So CCV for me is exactly what it says on the back of that card. He's an added layer of security for Celtic, and when he's not there, like you say, James, we do look a lot more vulnerable. I'm going to be speaking about Moritz Jens in a wee second, because there was a phenomenal quote from Jens, honestly. You'd have thought a PR team had written it for him. We're going to have a wee look at that, where he sits now that Kobayashi's in. That'll take us on to the fact that he made a 10-minute appearance or so, a cameo appearance, even though he can't play domestically or competitively until January. He did make an appearance in that bounce game. Kookaburra Potter at Chelsea mentioned JJ by name after the Brazil game. Is that a sign of interest? Well, it's certainly a sign of awareness of the player.
I love Chelsea looking at the Croatia centre-back. That looks like it's a certainty to happen in January. Hopefully, with the American owner who's spending all the money, they can sort of cast an eye to the right-back position and maybe give us a load of money for Juranovic as well.
Certainly. I think back to the game.
The sort of owner that would get sucked in by the World Cup hype and just splash 30 million. Oh,
well, listen, if we benefit from that, then all the better. The game last season, that again, talking about right-backs, the scenario that we now find ourselves in, remember the semi-final of the Scottish Cup, we get put out by Rangers, and there's a scenario in the period of extra time, where Stephen Welsh comes on as a sub and he's playing right-back, and Ralston's playing left-back. You remember that? And you look at the scenario we now find ourselves in. Yeah, it was terrible. We looked so disjointed. And now we've got three right backs at the club, any of whom obviously we've only seen snippets of Johnson in games at the World Cup, you'd be pretty confident with. Let's not forget Tony Ralston. He's just there as a constant now. He'll be playing backup, or he'll be first choice. The countdown to our game starts here. We'll be talking about the Aberdeen game as well, Urban Culture, before we...
You know about the World Cup players? Who's going to be back for the Aberdeen game? Is it everybody bar Juranovic?
It's a good point, actually, and if anybody's got more information about that, because I've read that Carter Vickers may not be back. I don't know if they're going to be given extra rest
Maybe
periods, James. Yep.
Maybe because they all got to the knockouts, they're all playing sort of games very close to now. They might not be back.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see if any of them make it. Frank Brennan's not having it. If anyone is willing to put anything like 15 million on the table for JJ, grab it with both hands and feet. Frank, we appreciate two sides of this debate, and you think 15 million quid. That was my original fee, but I think it's escalated now. And Alan Robertson, JJ's value is heavily inflated due to the World Cup. Absolutely. He's been poor this season. Take the money and run. Was it yourself? Or maybe Brian that said that, Ralston's actually been better than Juranovic for Celtic this season.
I don't know if I'd call Juranovic poor this season. I think he's just been solid, but a bit disappointing in the Champions League, because we all viewed him as one of our better, if not best players. Because he played at the Euros, we thought he would be brilliant at that level, but he looked a bit out of his depth. And yeah, I've mentioned quite a few times, I think Anthony Ralston's been more consistent this season. He's been a better attacking threat. He's not a better player overall. I think we all know that. Juranovic just had a bit of an off period. But I think Ralston has been a better player this season. So we see going forward, the crosses that Ralston's put in, I think he's been the better player.
Mm-hmm. No. I mean, I'm a massive fan. You know that as well. Obviously, I'm not a member of the fan club that was set up by Amy Canavan, but I have applied. Stubbsy's horse. This single has been hyped more than England team. Looking forward to it. Yes, we do have a habit of hyping things up, but I'll tell you what, you will not be disappointed. I am buzzing about this. Not because, we're releasing a single and anything can happen when it's out there, because every view and stream, and I believe even YouTube views now have been registered into the mix. Obviously, need hundreds, maybe thousands before you get the equivalent of one download. But it's all chat return, so you never know what may happen. And once there's a wee bit of momentum building during the week, we'll keep you updated. We'll keep the hype up, Stubbsy's horse, and hopefully we can raise a few good quid for charity. At the moment, our endeavours have raised just over 85 grand. Can we get up to 100 grand at this time of the year for needy causes? I hope we can. Now, there's a few other really, really good points coming in. John, the van driving legend, still a driving god. Hi, Paul. Merry Christmas to you and to yourself and the rest of the show. What would you reckon our next signing will be? We'll be talking a wee bit about that and who's been linked to us. I passed you the other day. I like your car. It would be better if I had a massive shamrock on it, John, but I don't know if that would be a good idea. It did cross my mind, though, I've got to say. You know whose birthday it is today? Kundai Benyu. You remember him? He's 25 today, right?
I remember a certain friendly. I can't.
He played in Europe. Sure. He played in Europe for us.
Yeah, I
Kundai Benyu.
I thought he looked decent.
He is now playing his football in Iceland with IBV. He was a Zimbabwe international, probably still is. But it was at that time we were bringing in players. You didn't know if you were coming and going. But obviously Rodgers rated him, played him a couple of times. But yeah, it's interesting how these careers go. After that, let's have a wee chat then about the Rennes bounce game. We know it finished 4-3. A couple of goals from O'Reilly, one by Kyogo. What kind of positive do we take from that? We know it was a fitness exercise. I was a wee bit gutted we couldn't somehow, somewhere, stream it. We know there was a journalist at the game who was supplying very, very good updates, and the goals have obviously emerged as well. What positives do we take from that, James?
I think, as you mentioned the point there, just getting some fitness in the players. Because I don't know how long it's been since they said the Super Cup, maybe about 2 weeks. It feels like an eternity ago. I don't know about you, but that feels like it was ages ago. But it's good to get minutes in the legs. It's good with Cal McGregor back. It's brilliant to see him back in the team. And as I've mentioned on the podcast quite a few times, having Cal McGregor back in, playing that 6 role, allows Matt O'Reilly to go a bit further forward. And we saw he got 2 goals in the bounce game against Rennes. That's the effect he can have against a decent opposition, friendly aside. And it was good to see Kyogo get on the score sheet as well. And hopefully they can sort of build from that onto the Aberdeen game. And said there was a lot of positives, but there was a lot of negatives as well. As we mentioned, the set pieces looked like somewhere where we're weak. And if we're going to be without Cameron Carter-Vickers against Aberdeen at Pittodrie, which is already a tough game in its own right, but without Carter-Vickers it becomes even more difficult to try and combat Aberdeen. But as always, we trust Ange will get the job done.
We do. We absolutely do trust Ange. One thing I do like about him, it's a bounce game, but like you say, he leaves no stone unturned, James. If he's unhappy with performances or, passages of play, he's going to put it right. It was a bounce game, but he will have learned good and bad about various players. I think some of the positives that I noted, obviously the return of Callum McGregor, phenomenal. He's been away for a few games, obviously. I think he's missed 10 games in total, hasn't he? 3 in the Champions League. We won every game that he missed domestically, but we failed to win the 3 games in the Champions League. So he's a massive loss. We know that. I think Kobayashi getting 10 minutes was a good sign. I know actually the first game he is able to play is the Rangers game on the 2nd of January, and I don't think he's going to be thrown in there unless there was an absolute crisis with injuries. And although it was a training exercise, I wanted to see it. And we would have covered it as well. But the other one, and this is quite an interesting one because I've been reading a lot about how obviously things are changing behind the scenes with the academy, with the B team. Obviously, Ange is taking time to make his mark, but Bosun Lawal and Rocco Vata were both in the squad. They both got minutes again, and that's going to do them brilliant in terms of their development. But I do get a slight concern, James, that they step back to Tier 5 of Scottish football, they play with the B team again. How long does it take before that starts stumping their progression a wee bit? Do we consider, with these two guys, loaning them out, maybe to a championship club or clubs? Do you think that would be a better option than them playing the rest of the season with the B team?
Yeah, this is something I've been really critical of with the B team. They always say, Steve McManus and Darren O'Day, and even Ange himself, we're just trying to create the pathway for the B team to the first team. I mean, Ben Doak was a hot prospect, and the only reason he got a chance was because Liverpool were trying to sign him up, but we didn't want to lose a hot prospect.
Yeah.
How long is it going to take before clubs notice that Rocco Vata isn't getting a sniff around the first team, and they come and try and get him? It's all well and good playing them in meaningless friendlies, but until we actually give these players a chance in a league game or a cup game, I eyeballed last week, I think it was the Morton game, as a big chance to give these players the opportunity. I think if we don't see Lawal or Vata in the squad for that match, whether it be in the starting 11 or on the bench, then I don't know how much of a chance they're going to get in this season, because that's the best they'll get. And perhaps a loan move could be the route. I mean, well, a lot of players we've had that hasn't worked out, but then you look at Callum McGregor, that loan spell at Notts County, that really turned him around. Christopher Ayer, that loan spell at Kilmarnock. I don't know whether you want to loan them out to another team in the league, or you would loan them down to the sort of lower divisions in England. I'd be more inclined to give them to another Scottish Premiership team. I don't know how you feel. It gets them used to playing in this league already, much like if we were to give them an opportunity in a league game. But we'll need to see how it goes. I'd prefer a loan. But if they are going to get opportunities, maybe around 5 or 6 appearances in the second half of the season, then keep them around.
I go back to points I've made probably previously where, we loan out upwards of 20 players a season, and they could be anywhere. We've loaned players out all over the world. America, for example. Players are being loaned out left, right, and centre. And I think that what is key, because often it doesn't work out. There are the exceptions to that rule, like McGregor, Ayer, Christie, to name but 3. But I think if you've got almost like a nursery club, I'm not talking about a feeder club. You're feeding them, the players. But the club would need to have the same philosophy and potentially the same style, maybe even the same formation as Celtic. And there's an agreement where you're given that team 3 or 4 young players until the B team are able to get promoted into up the leagues, and they're not ready for that anyway because the quality's not there. But until that such times as they're able to get promoted, James, I just think that if you had a nursery club sitting in the Championship, that would be an ideal resolution to that. It is great to put players out, I think, also to Premiership clubs, because I also think that often they can do you a job against your challengers. There's no point in having 5 or 6 players not playing when you could, loan them out to Hibs, Hearts, Aberdeen, etc. If indeed you're able to get the deals done. I think Montgomery was playing when St Johnstone took points off Rangers, and you look at that and you think to yourself, right, he's contributed to Celtic's success, even though he's playing with another team. Kevin Graham comes in. Kevin Graham has been contributing and part of the AXOM team since day one, 2017. He's heard the song, he's seen the video, he calls the both of them brilliant. The Celtic support, says Kevin, are stunning and will do their thing. Goes on to say, hit the like please, troops. Yeah, please do. Hit the like button on the YouTube. If you haven't already done so, subscribe to the YouTube channel as well. Let's have a wee chat about Maurice Jens. He's a player who I think he's done pretty well since he came to Celtic. He's on a season-long deal from Lorient, and he is an ex-Fulham player, German, 23 years of age. He knows Matt O'Reilly really well, good pals at Fulham, and he worked with Peter Grant. So he knows all about Celtic because I'm pretty sure Peter Grant will have told him all about it before he came. 19 appearances now, James. 2 goals. He came early in his Celtic career. And I'm going to read out my favourite part of his recent quote. It says, Celtic is old school. Celtic is mysterious. In fact, did Kevin Graham write this for Maurice Jens? We need to ask Kev. It sounds quite poetic. Celtic is old school. Celtic is mysterious. Celtic is pure football. And above all, Celtic is a religion. What do you make of that?
Well, it sounds like I've put on a Celtic jersey and I've started talking as if I'm a German centre, but
it's brilliant.
It's I don't know who's been feeding him it, or if it's PR, or if he's just really looked into it himself, but we could tell from the start that he was really enjoying his time at Celtic, always getting involved with the post-match celebrations, and he was a really strong performer. At the start, I remember speaking to people who were at his sort of fan media presser, and apparently he was a really nice guy. He shook everybody's hand after the presser. He's apparently just a really good person, which is the sort of people you want in this Celtic team. As far as how he's been on the park, I think he started really positively. There was a lot to rave about, but since then, a couple of Champions League games and a couple of games in the league, he's made a few mistakes. There's been shaky moments there that sort of make me think that Kyle Starfelt would be the better player to start at centre-back. But just on those comments, you can tell he's pretty passionate. And should we look to pay the money in the summer? Who knows? If we're going to get Stephen Welsh out on a loan or a transfer out for him, then we should bring Maurice Jens in, because right now we've got, 5 centre-backs competing for a position where we're only going to have 2 players playing week in, week out. One's got to go, inevitably. But it's just more of a question of who it is.
Definitely. It's incredible, again, going back to the right-back position, James, where Ange Postecoglou comes in. We can't, buy a right-back. The only right-back at the club at that time was Tony Ralston. And he's obviously turned into a diamond. And now we've got 3. You look at the centre-half position as well. And now, as you say, we've got 5, and you're starting to ask yourself, what does the future hold for Jens? Do we keep him? Because obviously he's no permanent. What does the future hold for Welsh? Because he's not playing enough games for the age that he's at and for his own progression. And, it'd be interesting to hear what your thoughts are in the comment section. I've heard differing fees in terms of what the permanent transfer fee would be. I've heard from 2 to 3 million quid. I've heard more than that.
He's been the one I've heard sort of touted the most, £3 million.
I think for £3 million, James, you buy Maurice Jens. I mean, I know it's a lot of money in anybody's language. However, in terms of a 23-year-old who's already bedded into the squad, who obviously gets what Celtic are about, because of that quote that I've just read out there. And, I just think £3 million. We talk about buying all these players for under £3 million. Juranovic, for example, I think it was 2.7. Juranovic. So it's a bit of a no-brainer for me. I would bring him in, and it's basically him, Kobayashi, it's Starfelt, and it's Carter Vickers. And then the questions start surrounding Welsh. What do you do with Welsh? Well, he's a guy I think you wouldn't put him to a lower league club in Scotland. You'd want him at Hibs or something like that, if that was possible to do that deal. But of course, we know that
if we're going to buy Maurice Jens in the summer, then that says to me that Stephen Welsh is going to go on a permanent deal.
Potentially.
There's too many centre-backs there, in my opinion. But I'll get a wee question here. Would you rather get rid of Stephen Welsh on a permanent transfer and get Maurice Jens in, or would you rather keep Stephen Welsh at the club, maybe get him a loan out in January to the end of the season, then have him next season, and don't sign Maurice Jens?
That's a dilemma, actually. And it's a good point of discussion. I think if I was answering that question, I'm a fan of Welsh. I know what the loan deals have done for the players we've mentioned before, but it doesn't always work like that. I think that if he was to go out on loan at a club like some of the clubs that have been interested in him, Udinese, Toulouse, I think what you find is a transformative kind of like period that we've seen with some of the young Scottish talent have gone over to Italy, for example, and Aaron Hickey. He's gone over there and he's developed probably as we would have expected, but more quickly than we would have expected. And he comes back and he gets a big money move to Brentford. The other one, obviously, is Lewis Ferguson, who has gone over there and he's got, I think there's 4 different clubs. Josh Doig, there's loads of interest in him. And I think that if you get out of the Celtic world, the Goldfish Bowl of Glasgow, and then you take a move, maybe an Italian, and I'm going to say the Italian move would be best because you look at the success of some of the Scots over there, not forgetting Liam Henderson, who's gone over there and performed really, really well as well. Maybe it's a case of, if it's a permanent deal, you could get a Jack Hendry scenario where someone ends up going for big money later down the line. But what is Stephen Welsh worth right now? He's not going to get a game. He's probably not even a second choice or a third choice, centre half. I think a loan, for me, would be in his best interest and in the club's best interest.
Yeah.
But if you're going to keep him, as you say, you're probably not going to keep Jens.
Yeah, if you're talking about a permanent move, and we're looking at a price tag, what was it? Udinese were going to pay £2 million in January. Has Stephen Welsh got that much better? He's got a year older, but that's probably about it. So I think if we were going to sell him, perhaps about maybe £2.5 million, and then you pay the £3 million for Jens in the summer. I mean, I just hope we don't get a scenario where he goes to Italy or some league like that, a top 5 league, and becomes a quality player. And then it's all about, look what Celtic missed.
I know. This is a risk.
Because the potential's there, but we're just not really getting it.
Without a doubt, the potential is there, and there is. I would not be surprised if he gets a move to Italy because there has been interest in him. Before you know it, James, he's in the Scotland squads, the Value Rockets, and very much like the other 3 Scottish players we've mentioned, this other interest starts coming in from Italy and elsewhere, and you start thinking to yourself, we've got Maurice Jens here who's maybe not playing, and your whole perception of the scenario changes because that's what we do as football fans, but they're very, very fickle. Callum McGregor returns this weekend. Question for you, James, who drops out, but we've already spoken about the fact Mooy, the decision may already have been made. Mooy may not be available because he's World Cup exploits.
Yeah, to having Callum McGregor to start that game, it's going to be a massive boost for Celtic. It's not that we needed the boost anyway, because as you said earlier on in the podcast, we won every single game when it was gone. But the fact that we've still got him to come back, and that's going to make us even better, is pretty frightening for the rest of the teams in the league. And as I mentioned, I was talking about the Rennes friendly, having McGregor back allows Matt O'Reilly to go further forward, which I think is going to benefit us massively because that's Matt O'Reilly's his natural position. And he was absolutely phenomenal there at the sort of second half of last season, and we're going to be able to transition play a lot smoother as well with Cal McGregor receiving the ball from the centre backs now, and it'll be a joy to see Cal McGregor back in a Celtic jersey. I'm not too sure how long the sort of wait has to have him back. What's it been, about 3 months?
Well, 10 games, yeah. So yeah, including the World Cup break as well. So 3 months out. As I say, I mean, I had made a comment a few Thursdays ago talking about how O'Reilly had come in and the transition of changing position, etc. And, although we were winning games, we weren't bossing them the way that we would like. We weren't winning by big margins the way that we would like. And JP pointed out that we missed them far more in the Champions League games, James. And that's where, obviously, we had 2 defeats and a draw in his absence. He comes in, he's the captain, he's a leader. He is, if there is a talisman, he is it for Ange Postecoglou. And I wonder what happens to that face mask. You know what I mean? There's been certain things in Celtic's past, and I often wonder what happened to Bertie's hat that he wore after the Leeds United game. Where is it? Where's Tom Boyd's Jester's hat that he wore after he stopped the 10? And obviously the mask that Callum McGregor wore for the best part of last season. Where on earth is that as well? We are being
a bit of memorabilia that someone's selling on eBay or something. Signed Callum McGregor mask, like how they sell the signed match-worn jerseys, signed match worn Cal McGregor Phantom of the Opera mask.
It would get interest. I always wondered what happened to Henrik Larsson's dreadlocks, because whoever caught them should have kept them. You know what I mean? For future purposes of retaining DNA, if nothing else. Now, we've got Aberdeen obviously coming up. We've not had a great time of it in the friendlies. I don't think we read too much into that, to be honest with you, James. But obviously, if you look at the team that started against Rennes, even though it was a bounce game, strong starting lineup. We can have a strong, and we will have a strong starting lineup against Aberdeen. How do you see that going?
Well, as I mentioned earlier on, if we're going into it without Cameron Carter-Vickers, it'll be a lot more of a tougher game. I'm not too sure how Aberdeen's form was before the break, but when you've had that sort of much of a break, an extended break since the football ended, does form go out the window when you're looking at this game? I've not played in absolute ages. There's no momentum to carry over. It's like a clean slate. It's like the first game of the season, essentially. So the Aberdeen, they've got some really good players. Majowski is the sort of standout one. He's been the top scorer. A lot of penalties, but he's been the standout one. But we should, even if without Carter-Vickers or Mooy or the players that were at the World Cup, we should still have enough quality to get the job done. With Cav and Cal McGregor back, will be such a boost, as I mentioned. I mean, he was fit to play in the Sydney Super Cup, but obviously you're not going to risk the captain potentially getting an injury in the Sydney Super Cup. That's not going to happen. But the fact that he was fit there and then he's played in the bounce game against Rennes, that just tells me he's going to start.
Well, I mean, let's actually cover the game during the charity weekender, James, because that's what we'll be doing for 3 hours. It'll be a watch along rather than a pre-match, half-time and full-time analysis, and we'll be covering it every single inch of the way. Please get involved in the charity weekender. If you want to start donating to the St Mary's Fund, then the link is underneath this particular video, as is the single, The Glory and the Dream. The link is underneath this video as well. And I've already mentioned The Glory and the Dream a few times. Yeah, I'll keep pushing that because we're going to premiere it on Friday night, and I'm sure you will enjoy the video. The only other thing I'm going to say as well is Danny McGrain is going to be at the penalty spot on Saturday signing copies of my new book. And you know, Danny McGrain is an absolute legend, and therefore get yourself over there. You'll get the book a £5 cheaper, and Danny will sign it as well. We're all talking about right backs. Danny was a world class right back. Juranovic is a right back playing on the world stage. How much will we get for Juranovic when that time comes? That's been one of the big points of debate. If you're watching this on catch up, leave your comments underneath the video because obviously I will try and get back to you as soon as possible. For all the other advertisements that have been appearing in the comment section, namely for Triple X hot videos, not quite sure if they're a Celtic fan or not, and people trying to punt other podcasts, then keep it out because they're going to be deleted as well. Thanks everybody for getting involved, and thank you once again, James Mackenzie, for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.